So, how we're gonna do this is that I'm gonna ask Brooks questions in a very sexy voice. Well, Brooks runs an agency, a conversion agency. How many here run an agency? How many are consultants? Yeah, like a third, 25%. And Brooks works with very big companies. How many here are very big companies? Lucas. Oh, more hands. All right, so everybody else is in the middle. That's your audience.
Awesome.
So we're going to talk about how to set up optimization processes within agencies, within companies. So as Leo said, how do we optimize optimization? So over the last few days, we've been hearing a lot about processes, methodologies, stuff like that. So now when we go back to our teams on Monday or whenever you go back to work, and we want to improve our optimization program, whether it's, if we're an agency, the programs that we set up for our clients, or if we are doing in-house optimization, if we want to improve our conversion program, what does a good program look like actually?
Well, a few years ago, I was meeting with a friend at Best Buy, and they were complaining about how their boss wasn't appreciating how I was meeting with their conversion optimization team. They were saying, our boss doesn't really understand everything we work on, and they have a great program. I mean, they're one of the better optimization cultures that I've seen. And I thought, well, I told them, like, I could talk to your boss and tell him you have a good program. And I thought, oh, well, I would love it if you would do that. And I came home from that meeting and I thought, wait, how will I break down and communicate that their program is so good? And that was the beginning of thinking about this maturity model of what are all of the facets of a good program. And we came up with 6 pillars, which you guys can see: culture, team, tools, process, strategy, performance. And then within each of them, we came up with 4 categories that shows how complicated a good program can be. And if you'd like, I can walk through some of these.
Yeah, please. So is it in order? So I start with culture and then proceed from there?
Kind of. It's not exactly in order, but for the most part, you have to start with a great culture. I mean, if you don't have a great culture, you're not going to ever get an amazing strategy or process.
Okay, so how do you create a culture of optimization? How do you get everybody on board? And so we can, speed of implementation is a problem. Like we need to run lots of tests, but legal doesn't allow it, the boss hates it, the whatever.
Yeah.
So how do you fix that?
Well, with one of the prerequisites for an amazing culture starts with having an executive sponsor. That, like anything else, you have to have someone at the top that really believes in testing. That's why Amazon is so successful. That's why Intuit is such an amazing testing program, because Scott Cook is behind testing. And so once you have that executive sponsor, then more tactically, what we looked at with culture, that things that show you have a good culture is how much do people want to test? And then why do they want to test? How much are they asking to test? How much are your teams, your execs asking you if you tested? Another thing that drives culture is sharing your results internally and celebrating all the risks and failures that people have. And then to help accelerate it, it's as simple as training. Having one amazing optimization leader, helping them really help others understand what a good test looks like and how it can benefit them and their programs.
Right. So that comes, I guess, to the point number 2. So in order for everybody to be on board with optimization, it needs to work. Like we need to be getting wins. So that means that we have to actually know what we're doing. So how do you train people so they would know? What kind of processes or structures do you set up in place for teams?
Well, teams usually starts, I mean, my perspective is all really big companies. So it's, you know, it's team, organizational design is different for everybody and it's very complex. What we often see where testing exists is within a product group will have just independently decide that, you know, they want to start with building, running experiments for their product, and so they'll hire someone to run optimization for them, or they'll hire a developer. And actually, hiring a developer is absolutely a prerequisite for every testing program, whether or not you're a massive company or a tiny agency. So they build their own custom testing team, starting with a developer. On the flip side, on the other end of the spectrum, a lot of large companies eventually get to having a center of excellence of testing that is just like analytics or engineering. We have a group of experts that are training the rest of the product and marketing groups, their different methodologies and processes.
Tools. Let's talk about tools. So we have the processes, we have the people. What are the tools that you typically put in place? And it doesn't matter, we don't need to say that you use, you know, this particular software, but what types of tools should every optimization, like for data gathering, data analysis, or whatever, for fun?
Well, most of our clients use Adobe. They're Adobe Analytics, and so therefore they often work with Adobe Target. Almost all of our clients have Adobe Target. We're platform agnostic, and so we work with Optimizely, Monetate, Maximizer, Qubit, Adobe Target, and SiteSpect. But for the larger the companies, usually they have integrated data. Since there's so much data, making sure that it's fully integrated is key. So that's what we're seeing. But when it comes to them being successful with it, getting all of that data integrated is what really unleashes the power of testing. And it's pretty uncommon. I mean, even at the enterprise level, you know, people, their testing is not necessarily fully integrated with analytics. It's not integrated with their voice of customer. It's not integrated, it's almost never integrated with any sort of offline systems. I mean, it's just, so the more, and tag management is starting to change that and making it easier to integrate those different systems. But the more data, the better when it comes to testing.
What kind of qualitative research tools do you use? Do you use any eye tracking stuff?
We like ClickTail, we like user testing. But usually most of our test strategy is almost 100% data driven. That we first start with the data. And
what data?
Well,
Where does
from
it come
analytics.
From? Okay.
So from Adobe Analytics or Google Analytics. Our methodology around testing is that when we're coming up with our test ideas, we have a war room where we have a cross-functional group of people, an analyst, an engineer, a designer, and our test strategist, all getting together. And our methodology is, like what Brian was saying, it's very much about the customer needs, where we first ask who are our segments, who are the customers that we are targeting in this test. And then, based on that, we ask what are their needs, and those are still assumptions, you know, then that's where qualitative can help add to that. And then we think about what are the obstacles, if those assumptions are true, and therefore what would be some potential solutions. And so it is kind of getting us into the customer mindset. But before that, to help that process be data-driven, we have a pre-strategy meeting with our analysts, where the head of strategy and all of our analytics teams get together and they go through basically a brainstorm to ask the analysts to go and get different data points to validate different assumptions and questions, so that once we do our roll, the analysts basically present their findings.
So do you do this before every test?
Every test.
Every test for every client? You get a team together? It's not a solo effort?
No, never.
All right.
We did over 200 tests last year, so this is happening all the time.
You mentioned usertesting.com. Does anybody else have this problem with usertesting.com, that the person who is supposed to be like a client or like a real user starts giving you advice? It's like, what the hell's up with that? Professional testers, well, I mean, stay-at-home moms giving you advice. not acting as real users, that's a real problem for me. And recruiting people for qualitative research is a constant challenge for me. How do you do it?
To be honest, we don't do it very often. I mean, it's because you want to test quickly, and to go through all of that effort, we do it really at the beginning of a project to come up with a bunch of ideas and just sort of help us learn some blind spots that we may not see. But frankly, it's one of those conceptual things that it makes sense to use qualitative data. And I think that we probably should, but frankly, we don't. Just out of the reality of testing quickly, focusing on the data for us is usually much more, it's just as powerful.
Got it. Okay, let's talk about some processes. So besides having everybody there for a hypothesis meeting, what other components of your testing program or processes that you set up, what are the other components? How does the whole picture come together?
Well, I think it's a standard process wheel where we have the first step is our pre-strategy meeting where we gather the data in the war room, and then every single test has 3 documents: the experiment design, then the concepts with the wireframes, and then the final results. So those are 3 documents that we use. So we put together the test idea and present it to our client, and then we try to get the concept as quickly as possible, because if it's often the test idea doesn't necessarily translate visually, or what we produce is not what the client thought they signed off on. And so we get as much buy-in into that get that done as early as possible. And then, of course, we produce the assets, set out the campaign, and build the front-end code. And then the most important step, and not a very interesting part, but probably the most important, is the QA. We have a massive QA script to QA in every conceivable. We have 102
Did you build it
points.
in-house, or?
Yes, we did. And we do it pre-launch and then post-launch, because a broken test is like the worst thing in the world. Because you've just wasted all your time, your client's time and money, your own time and money. It's embarrassing. And it reduces their trust in you. And so that's, and it's one of those things that's completely underappreciated in the industry. We were talking with one of our clients and asked her how she QA'd, and she said, I just check it at work, and then I go home and check it on my home computer. Like, that's kind of not enough. That's completely inadequate. Right. So we say it all the time, and there's a lot of broken tests as a result.
Let's talk about strategy. So you have a new client that you're working on, or can be in-house or whatever. So how do you determine the whole optimization strategy? How do you prioritize, test the whole thing?
Well, first what we do is, it really depends on where they are in their maturity model. We have benchmarked 300 companies, and so there's 5 different levels of maturity. So it kind of depends on where they stand in this. We see that clients go through kind of 5 stages of maturity and what the purpose of their testing program is for them. The first stage is the risk reduction stage, where they're using testing experiments just to validate their existing intuitive thinking. They often build a feature and they test it as a last step before they launch it, but testing had nothing to do in developing that feature. It's just a check. And testing is really used to prove their points. It's very political, and it's just to make sure that nothing really bad happens. So that's risk reduction testing, and it's very first stage. The second stage of testing with strategy is we call the Buckshot Approach. And that is often where a company or group has just gotten a testing tool installed, and they have no idea what they're doing, but they're very excited to be testing now. And so they test all over the place. We call that kind of another word is popcorn testing, where they're kind of testing what they can test. They use just the features of the tool, and they look at really superficial metrics. So they might get a win, and if they do, they don't win very often. And they get very tired of testing very fast. It's like it's something that they're just playing with. The third is we call best practice land. And this is where most companies kind of mature into, where testing is finally driving value on its own, and they want to win, and winning is the most important thing. And so they usually have someone in charge of optimization who reads lots of blogs, comes to lots of conferences, but it still ends up being very much about tactics and like button colors and that kind of thing. Yep. But since winning is the most important thing, learning is not the most important thing, and there's very little time that's spent on why something won. If it wins, that's all that matters. We move on to the next thing. So tests don't really build on themselves, and they're just sort of it's very tactical. And that's okay. It's winning and doing well, and most companies are in this stage, and that's fine. But the fourth level of maturity that we see is, we call it applied psychology, and that's when winning is not as important. It's now thinking about the customer and their needs, and it's thinking about their psychology. And so having an insight is just as important as a win. And so there's much more patient testing, and and the learn rate is just as more important.
How do you document those insights, those learnings from tests, and if you bring new people onto a project, how do you get them up to speed?
It's hard. It's really hard. We are building a knowledge base internally where we are documenting every single test. And as part of it, the way that we build tests with the 3 documents, that's really what we're doing, is really building a story with every single test. So the better we get at storytelling, and the better we get at really articulating the question at the beginning of the test and what we're going to learn about our customer and what we're going to do about it if it wins or if it loses, and what have we learned, all that pre-planning of what we're going to do once we get all the results, then it makes it easier for us. Our goal at the end of each test is to filter it down to a single tweet length insight that we can capture in our knowledge base. Like 1 tweet length, and we're trying to keep the story intact. So that's not just in that one. We had a test, a simple test recently for a content site where we changed, and you can check your email, and the idea was to change the email to an icon, and the word email to an icon, and it didn't work. And so the learning was that it's not that icons aren't as good as writing it out, but that for this particular audience, for older people, which is the audience of this, that icons, that they prefer the clarity of writing things out than icons. Or it could be that these icons don't work. But getting it down to that tweet length is really quite difficult. That's the goal, though, and that's how you can transfer it. And that way, when you have new people joining your company, they still have to go and just read all that stuff and absorb it. But making them a lot of stories will make it a lot easier for them to get the nuance from that test, which I think is very important.
So once I have this testing program in place, and you talk about maturity, so how can I self-assess how am I doing and where are my weak points? How do I determine if I'm doing well?
Well, looking at how many, there are simple things like how many tests have you gotten out the door? That's not the most important thing, but if you're getting more than 1 test a month done, then I think that's pretty good.
1 test is good?
At least.
That seems awfully low to me.
Remember, I'm coming from the perspective of large companies where there is a ton of complexity and approvals and there's legal, and for us that's successful.
See, guys, you're actually doing well.
Yeah.
When I ask you how many tests you were running, I'm giving you shit. So you're not running enough tests.
I mean,
do better?
for us, tests take 6 weeks, each one, because it takes about a month to get a test fully designed and built and QA'd and launched, and then it has to run for at least 2 weeks for it to achieve significance.
Right. Okay. So, I'm working with a client or I'm doing in-house optimization, and I want to now quantify the value that I have added. So let's say that I've had a series of winning tests, or let's say 10 tests, and they all had some sort of an uplift, 2% here, 5% here, blah, blah, blah. So how do I now know, 12 months later, how much is the revenue is because of my tests?
There are a few, we have never been able to fully solve that in a way that is absolutely 100% rock solid. Because once you implement the test, you will lose your ability to track it. And you won't be able to see if it fatigues. So we look at it as we have basically 2 numbers, one that is a conservative number and one that is a speculative number. The conservative is that it's what was gained during the test period and then a month to 3 months afterwards. And then we assume it's going to fatigue and everything will change. The speculative is that we annualize it for a whole year. And so it's somewhere in that range, and beyond that, all bets are off.
Got it. As an agency, we have, 25% people here. So people building their agencies or getting into this, what's your best tip how to succeed in this business?
To get really good at stats and also get an engineer and an analyst to run it, or have someone who has an analytical mindset be the driver behind this, and also to be very honest and very skeptical of your tests. Because there can be so many false positives, and building that long-term trust with your client is of critical importance. And it's difficult because there is so much pressure to produce ROI and get a win and to show all of this money that you're making for your client. But with testing, if they don't really see it in their bottom line, and it's going to undermine their trust for you. And for us, what we see in the industry is only 1 in 4 test wins. We track our win rate and we hover 30 to 40%. But it's hard to do that, and it's painful to tell our client that was a flat test and that was 3 weeks that we didn't gain anything for them. And so having that courage and honesty is difficult, but it's very, very important.
The future of CRO. What's coming next, in your opinion? Like, is it going to be more personalization, machine learning? What should we start thinking about? What should we start learning?
I think personalization and machine learning is absolutely coming next. We're focusing on it too, and we're building our perspective on personalization. But I do think that conversion optimization is still a very new and young industry, that we still have a lot of the foundational elements to figure out, like methodology. Like, I see so many bad tests all day long with our clients, everywhere. There's so many politics, so many companies are not testing yet, that simply just doing what we're already doing and have been doing for the last 5 years, we can keep doing this for the next 5 years and be fine. I think rushing into something like personalization and machine learning is premature because there's still a lot of work to be done here. But they are closely related, and I think it is important to keep an eye on those 2 trends.
Awesome. Well, let's get to some audience questions here. Has Pep had on the same clothes since Wednesday? Thank you for this highly relevant question. It's truly honored to see this quality. In Google, why do Mark Zuckerberg and Steve Jobs wear the same clothes every day? Same answer. Can you expand on your internal QA tool?
It is not a tool, it's more of a script. Where we have our project managers do the QA. We we check, it's 102 points. We're checking all the different browsers and different platforms, and we go through basically all the different journeys to get to the different pages and looking at under multiple different environments. I haven't looked at the QA script in detail recently, so I can send you the script. I'm happy to share it with you guys.
Send us the
if that would
script,
be helpful.
we'll send it out.
Yeah.
Awesome. All right.
Send me an email. My email is brooks@brooksbell.com, and I'll send you the script.
Good stuff. Is conversion optimization real, or is it basically a bunch of charlatans trying to get paid on things that can't actually be measured?
I don't know how to answer that one.
Is it real, or are we a bunch of scammers here?
No, I think that it is absolutely real. I mean, I think we should think of ourselves as scientists. And I think the more that we focus on what's good for the customer, the end customer, rather than the client, the more legitimate what we're doing and the more strategic it is. I think just getting a win, that is what's important for the client, but that is just how you measure what you're doing. If you're staying completely oriented towards improving this experience for the customer and helping your clients also align to that, because it's really hard for them too. I think that it's a really wonderful thing that we're doing.
Yeah, I think Lucas has some good answers about that. Find Lucas. All right, next question. What are the roadblocks to CRO that you are seeing when pitching new clients?
The roadblocks are, for us as an agency, we're competing with internal groups. And really, CRO should be, when you think about it, it should be an internal function. It's sort of an intimate thing to do. It's with you're working with your data, and it's really deep in the belly of these big companies. And so our obstacle is having them outsource it as an agency. So that's for all the agencies in here. That's what we're always running up against. We don't really compete with agencies. It's more competing with internal staff.
And then when you are trying to start working with a new client, what are some of the biggest friction points? What's not helping you close this deal?
It's always they have to have they need to be a certain point in their own maturity to benefit from testing. First of all, their data needs to be in a great place. And they have to also have the right goals in place. So if so many companies are still, their goals and performance, like people at the end of the year when they get their performance review from their boss, they're not evaluated on hitting specific results. They're still evaluated on like, I launched this site, or it really is, I launched this thing, I finished this program. And it's not whether or not if those things actually worked. There is no actual number that they are accountable to. If they're not accountable to a number, then testing really won't be that appealing to them, because it's going to be more threatening to them, because it will question their intuition and their activities. So it is our clients need to be already at a place where they see they have those goals and they're accountable to them, and they have data that they trust and that they can access. And so their culture needs to be at a place where they are becoming increasingly data-driven, where they're looking to data from an honest place, where they want to see not just data that supports their own agenda, but data that supports really what's good for the client and good for the company.
Awesome. Next question. What mix of testing do you recommend? How often do you do big strategic tests versus UX and smaller messaging tests?
We probably do our strategic tests, probably about 25% of our tests are strategic. The rest are tactical, UX kind of tests. But what's interesting is we categorize our tests in 3 buckets. Reducing friction, reducing anxiety, and changing motivation. And changing motivation tests are usually the ones that are a little bit more strategic. They have more of a psychology base, and they take a lot more effort. Those win at 3 times to 4 times the rate of the other two. But yet, we do those 1/4 of the time. Why? I don't know. It's because actually, I do know, they're really hard, and they take a lot of time and thinking and preparation. Whereas like swapping out a label is really easy, and you can do way more of those each month than you can the strategic tests.
I gotta do the heavy lifting, guys. We did. Brooks is sending the script. How did you benchmark those 300 companies? Where were they on the maturity scale on average? Any surprises?
Most of them part of the sample size, the ones that we were looking at, it's hard to get to a level 4 maturity. Vast majority of companies that we see are level 1 and 2. Conversion optimization is still pretty new, and to get to a level 3 in our model, you have to have a multi-person team internally. Your data needs to be fully integrated. You have to be doing, 50 to 100 tests within a large organization. You have to have a great way of sharing your results, and people need to be fully engaged. You have to have a way of there have to be multiple groups across the company testing, and so there's just not that many companies that are in that space yet. So there's a big opportunity still in this industry.
PEP has emphasized the importance of qualitative research, but it seems Brooks puts less focus on this. Can you expand on this? So yeah, why are you not doing more qualitative?
It's not out of, I think there's a lot of value in qualitative. I think that frankly, we should be doing more qualitative. The reason that we don't is that it's messy, and it can be distracting, and also our clients don't really necessarily value it, at least the clients that we work with. And so there is no pressure from our clients, and just like we wouldn't do a focus group. That would take way too long. It also is expensive. It's going to, user testing isn't that expensive, but it can be expensive if you want to do really good qualitative testing. It slows us way down, and one of the things I do want to, so on a per test basis, it just would slow us down. And our tests are already winning at above average rates without it, and so that's why. What we should be doing is doing it the very beginning of we should do it on a quarterly basis with our clients, and that is something that I'm pushing my team to start to explore. So I think it's an area that we should improve. So just being honest, we don't, and I think we should do a better job with that.
For me, qualitative is very important because, with web and quantitative stuff, I know what happens and where, but why? You can never figure that out. You can just have an idea, but it's way better to ask the person, hey, why are you not adding this product to the cart? And they'll tell you. And analyzing qualitative research is hard work. I completely agree. And getting the data is hard work. We do it at the start of a program, like we do one huge qualitative research and have all sides of insights, and we try to milk those findings as long as we can. And then down the line, there might be a time to do another round. And analyzing qualitative data, like responses that people give you, is just gruesome hard work. People get easily biased. The people actually analyzing and scoring the responses. It's so easy, like, hey, I go through this first 50 answers, no problem. And then once you get to 60, 70, and you have to go through hundreds. It's like you start skipping over the responses. And so yeah.
I think our clients are just so big that, and there's so many different segments and different needs. I think it's very helpful, and whenever we do it, I'm glad we did. It's just that because getting in front of actual clients, actual customers or clients in a structured way that is really trustworthy is for us. It just doesn't seem easy, and with our clients. everything is about these tests being rock solid, and they can't be messy. They have to be trustworthy because there's so many politics. And so when we add that messiness in, it may not, it's just something that, and it's also the fact that it's optional at this point, but I think it is something that we'll probably move towards.
Okay, let's take next question. Man, I can't see the screen. But the first word is, I need to look at my phone still. Can we hug Brooke? Brooks? That's how you spell it, actually. Well, you can ask her later. Other than ROI, what are the top 3 things you offer potential customers that are of the most valuable to them in hiring you? So basically, top 3 reasons you tell clients.
To work with us?
Yeah.
Well, it's learnings is the second most important thing. I mean, ROI and learnings, those are the two reasons to test. We position ourselves more as culture change to help them get more of an experimental scientific mindset, to change how they're making their decisions, to get much more customer-centric, which is a win for the customer, for their company, and for them internally. And so it's much more about changing the way the organization operates, to frankly be a little bit more like Amazon, and help them do it from the bottom up of building the right teams, organizing them in the right way, getting your tools set up in the right way so the data that you have is trustworthy, getting the process across all these different teams working well, and helping them communicate internally, helping them learn to tell a story with their data, how to be more clear, and how to construct the tests to get a really crisp insight from it. So the output of all of that is to know that we're successful, is that we're winning, or the client is winning, and generating revenue, or and learning along the way.
Can you address the question about the 5th stage of maturity level?
The 5th stage is, so the 5th stage of the strategic kind of pillar that I was talking about with the applied psychology and best practice land, the last is discovering your customer. And that is where compared to the 4th is much more about universal psychology principles, like social proof, and where you're thinking about principles rather than tactics and best practices. You're really thinking about the why did this work, not did it work. And so the 5th level is that you're moving away from universal principles into your specific customer needs. Who are your customers specifically? How are they different from each other? And basically you start segmenting like crazy, where you come up with 5 or 6 different personas, like what Brian is talking about, and you start iterating deeply into understanding each of those personas. That's basically the foundation of personalization. So it's going through those other 4 positions you to basically start personalizing, which is the 5th level.
So when you start working with new clients, they have to use software, Adobe Target, whatever. So the tools that are needed, are you telling clients which tools to sign up for? And if so, are you getting a kickback?
We don't get any kickback. We do sometimes recommend tools, but often they have a tool already, and we try not to take them off their tool. That most tools are fine, especially for companies just getting started, any of them will be fine. So we let them, they can stay on their tool. If they don't have one, we make a recommendation, but we don't get kickbacks from any of the tools, which I think is important because it keeps us completely aligned with our client and their customers rather than to our partners. And it gives us more of that credibility as third party. And also, tools change all the time. I mean, like a Target was like the king a few years ago, and then Optimizely came, and they're doing really well, and who knows what's going to happen, you know, and so aligning too deeply with any given tool, I think, is a little bit risky, and I think it is important to know all the tools so that you can really help your client choose what's best for them, or just help them get the most out of whatever they've already committed to.
Okay, let's take two last questions. Can you share documentation templates or approaches that you use? I guess this is for test insights and learnings.
I have the QA script. I'm happy to share. We also, I think we have a test queue, although I'm sure that you guys all, I mean, I don't think our test queue is any better than anyone else's test queue. You know, it's like anything else that you.
But what about those tweet length,
Yeah,
insight?
that we are building a full-blown internal knowledge base that is. So that is not something I'm going to be able to send out to everyone. But it's, and frankly, our documentation is changing all the time. It's slightly different for our different clients, and we're trying to make it better.
Sure, it's optimization, right?
Yeah.
So, all right, and last question. How do you charge for CRO services? Is it a fixed flat fee, a revenue share? How does that work?
I would love to do a revenue share, but we have never been able to figure that out. It's because even though you're sure that you got a lift based on the statistics, you can't ever be sure exactly how much it was. And so that makes it really difficult to price things as a rev share. So we've thought about that a lot. It's conceptually a wonderful thing to do, and doesn't work for us. The most that we've done with rev share is establish a little bonus at the end of the year if we hit a specific target KPI for our clients, a high-level KPI, then we'll take a little discount on our rates and then have a little bonus at the end if we hit that. So it allows us to put a little skin in the game and make sure that we're aligned on that. So we do that sometimes. Our fees otherwise are our flat rate each month, based vaguely on the amount of testing that we can do and the complexity of the testing. But it's not hourly rate, which I think is helpful. And I think that is because often you can come up with a great test idea in 1 hour. And I believe that having an hourly rate incents you to be slow and ineffective and to take a long time, because that's how you make your money. And so I think it's much better to focus to take more risk on yourself and have a flat fee and be in control of your processes and generate. And if you're hitting your results, then if you're very efficient doing that, then you'll have more profit. And if you're inefficient, then that's really on you.
So we have a bunch of questions left, so these you'll have to ask her in person during the break. Thank you so much, Brooks.
Yeah, thanks for having me.